I never thought I'd be telling this story. Not like this. Not after 33 years of carrying it like a stone in my chest. But here I am, 77 years old, sitting in my kitchen in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, with the morning sun streaming through the same curtains my wife Sarah picked out back in 1985. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm finally ready to talk about the day she walked out of our lives forever. It was a Tuesday in March of 1991. I remember because it was the day after our daughter Emma's 5th birthday party. We still had deflated balloons scattered around the living room and cake crumbs on the kitchen counter. Sarah had seemed distant during the party, barely smiling when Emma blew out her candles, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. We had 3 kids under 7. Emma was 5, Michael was 4, and little Katie had just turned 2 the month before. I was working at the John Deere plant then, pulling 10-hour shifts in the assembly line. The work was honest, but brutal on the body, and I'd come home every evening smelling like motor oil and metal shavings. Sarah stayed home with the kids, and I thought we had it figured out. I thought we were building something together. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I kissed Sarah goodbye at 6:30, ruffled the kids' hair as they ate their Cheerios, and headed to work in my old Ford pickup. The radio was playing some country song about heartbreak, and I remember thinking how glad I was that wasn't my story. How foolish I was. When I got home that evening, the house was too quiet. Not the normal kind of quiet when kids are napping or watching TV, but an empty quiet that made my stomach drop before my brain could catch up. I called out, "Sarah, kids?" and heard my voice echo in a way it never had before. Emma came running from the living room, her little face streaked with tears. "Daddy, Mommy left," she said, and those 3 words changed everything. Michael appeared behind her, holding Katie's hand. Katie was crying, though I don't think she understood why. "What do you mean, baby?" I asked Emma, kneeling down to her level, though my hands were already shaking. She packed a suitcase and said she had to go away. "She said to tell you." Emma paused, struggling with words too big for a 5-year-old. "She said to tell you she's sorry, but she can't do this anymore." I found the note on our dresser, written on the back of a grocery receipt in Sarah's familiar handwriting. "David, I can't pretend anymore. I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time. I need to find myself. The kids are better off with you. I'll send money when I can. Sarah." That was it. 18 years of marriage, 3 children, a mortgage, and shared dreams, reduced to a few sentences on the back of a receipt for milk and bread. The next few hours were a blur of phone calls. I called Sarah's sister in Des Moines first. "Oh, David," Linda said, and I could hear the pity in her voice. "She came by yesterday. She was with some young man." I tried to talk sense into her, but you know Sarah when she gets an idea. A young man. The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed Linda for details, and she reluctantly told me what she knew. His name was Tyler. He was 22, worked at the record store downtown where Sarah had been going a lot lately, supposedly to buy music for the kids. He had long hair and rode a motorcycle. He was younger than our marriage. I hung up the phone and looked at my 3 children, who were watching me with eyes too old for their faces. Emma had put herself in charge, making peanut butter sandwiches for Michael and Katie. The sight of my kindergartner trying to mother her siblings, because their actual mother had abandoned them, broke something in me that has never quite healed. That first night was the longest of my life. I put the kids to bed in our queen-size bed because they were scared to sleep alone. Katie kept crying for "Mama," and I didn't know how to explain something I didn't understand myself. How do you tell a 2-year-old that the person who brought her into this world decided she wasn't worth staying for? I called in sick to work the next day, something I'd never done unless I was genuinely ill. I needed to figure out how to be a single father to 3 traumatized children while processing my own abandonment. The house felt impossibly large and impossibly small at the same time. The first week was survival mode. I learned that Katie needed her juice watered down or she'd get diarrhea. I learned that Michael only ate the crusts off his sandwiches if you cut them into triangles. I learned that Emma was mature beyond her years, but still needed someone to check for monsters under her bed. I learned that getting 3 small children ready for daycare and school while preparing for work myself required the organizational skills of a military commander. I also learned about the shame, the whispers at the grocery store, the pitying looks from other parents at school pickup, the way conversations stopped when I walked into the break room at work. In 1991, in a small Iowa town, men didn't get abandoned by their wives. Women might leave abusive husbands, sure, but a man whose wife ran off with a younger man, that suggested something was wrong with him. My mother came to stay for a week to help, bless her heart. But at 71, chasing after a toddler while trying to manage 2 other kids was too much. "You need to find your groove, Davy," she said before leaving. "These babies need you to be strong." So I found my groove, one disaster at a time. I burned dinner more nights than I care to admit. I showed up to Emma's parent-teacher conference with Katie's oatmeal in my hair. I learned to do laundry by trial and error, turning half our clothes pink when I mixed reds and whites. I discovered that 2 a.m. was when the loneliness hit hardest, when the kids were finally asleep and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of my thoughts. The worst part wasn't the practical stuff, though. The worst part was watching my children grieve their mother while trying to convince them that everything would be okay. Emma became my little helper, taking on responsibilities no 5-year-old should have. Michael started wetting the bed again. Katie stopped talking for almost a month, communicating only in gestures and tears. I took them to see Dr. Patterson, the family counselor in town. She was a kind woman with gray hair and understanding eyes who helped me understand that children blame themselves when a parent leaves. They think if they'd been better, prettier, smarter, quieter, Mommy wouldn't have gone away, she explained. Your job is to keep telling them it's not their fault, even when you're not sure you believe it yourself. Because I wasn't sure I believed it. In the quiet moments, usually late at night when I was folding tiny clothes or washing dishes, I replayed our marriage like a detective examining evidence. Had I worked too much? Not enough? Had I stopped telling Sarah she was beautiful? Had I taken her for granted? Was there something I could have done differently to make her want to stay for her own children? The financial strain was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's income from her part-time job at the library hadn't been much, but it had covered groceries and helped with the utilities. Now I was supporting 3 kids on my factory wages, while paying for full-time daycare for Katie and after-school care for Emma and Michael. I picked up every overtime shift available, which meant even less time with the kids, which meant more guilt piled on top of the existing mountain. I learned to grocery shop with military precision, using coupons and buying generic brands. I learned to cut the kids' hair myself, watching YouTube tutorials on our ancient computer with dial-up internet. I learned to shop for children's clothes at thrift stores and garage sales, searching through piles of cast-offs for things that might fit my babies. The hardest moments came without warning, like when Emma asked me to braid her hair for school, and I had to watch a YouTube video 3 times before managing something that looked halfway decent. Or when Michael brought home a Mother's Day card he'd made at school and didn't know who to give it to. Or when Katie said her first word after her month of silence, and it was Dada instead of Mama, and I cried in the bathroom afterward because I was grateful and heartbroken all at once. Sarah called exactly twice in the first year. The first time was 3 months after she left, calling collect from somewhere in Colorado. She sounded different, younger somehow, like she was trying on a new personality. "How are the kids?" she asked, and I wanted to scream at her that they were heartbroken and confused and asking when she was coming home. Instead, I said they were fine and asked when she planned to come back. "I don't know, David. I'm figuring things out. I'm happy for the first time in years." Happy. She was happy while her children cried themselves to sleep asking for their mother. The second call came around Christmas. Tyler had apparently dumped her for someone even younger, and she sounded lost and desperate. "Maybe I made a mistake," she said, and for a moment, my heart leaped with hope. But then she added, "But I can't come back yet. I'm not ready." Ready for what? Ready to be a mother to the children she'd created? After that, silence. No Christmas cards, no birthday calls, no child support checks despite her promise to send money. It was like she'd evaporated from our lives completely. The kids adapted in their own ways. Emma became fiercely protective of our little family, often acting more like a co-parent than a child. She learned to help Katie get dressed and reminded Michael to brush his teeth. She never complained about the responsibilities that shouldn't have been hers, but I saw the way she watched other kids with their mothers, a longing in her eyes that pierced my heart. Michael threw himself into sports, first Little League, then soccer, then basketball. I think the structure and teamwork helped him feel part of something stable. He was good at it too, fast and coordinated, and I never missed a game. I'd sit in those aluminum bleachers cheering for my boy, surrounded by couples who took for granted that they had someone to share these moments with. Katie, being the youngest, adjusted maybe the best. Or maybe she just didn't remember her mother as clearly. She called me Daddy Mama for a while, which broke my heart and made me smile all at once. She was a bright, sunny child, despite everything, full of questions and hugs and an endless supply of knock-knock jokes she made up herself. The seasons passed, and we found our rhythm. I learned to make pancakes on Saturday mornings that actually looked like pancakes instead of abstract art. I figured out how to French braid Emma's hair for dance recitals. I discovered that reading bedtime stories in different voices made the kids laugh, and their laughter became the soundtrack that got me through the hardest days. By their second year without Sarah, we'd built something that felt like normal, even if it wasn't the normal I'd planned. Emma was excelling in school, often helping other kids with their reading. Michael had joined the school's advanced math program. Katie was potty-trained and full of personality, charming everyone she met with her gap-toothed smile and fearless attitude. But underneath our functioning exterior, we were all still healing from wounds that might never fully close. Emma developed anxiety about me leaving, always needing to know exactly when I'd be back from work or errands. Michael had nightmares sometimes, usually featuring scenarios where he couldn't find me. Katie went through a phase where she hoarded food in her bedroom, as if she was preparing for another abandonment. The community support surprised me. Mrs. Henderson next door started inviting the kids over for cookies after school when I was working late. Jim Morrison from church helped me fix the furnace when it broke down in the middle of February. The ladies from Emma's Girl Scout troop took turns driving her to meetings when I couldn't get off work. It takes a village, as they say, and I was grateful for every member of ours. Dating wasn't even on my radar for the first few years. The idea of bringing another woman into our fragile ecosystem felt impossible. How do you explain to someone that you come as a package deal with 3 kids who've been abandoned by their mother? How do you trust someone new when the person you trusted most in the world had walked away without looking back? But loneliness is a persistent companion. There were nights when I'd lie in bed listening to the house settle around us, missing adult conversation, missing someone to share the small victories and daily challenges with. Missing physical affection, yes, but mostly missing partnership. The weight of every decision falling on my shoulders was exhausting. When Emma was 8, Michael was 7, and Katie was 5, I finally went on my first date since Sarah left. Her name was Patricia, and she was a teacher at Michael's school. She was kind and patient, and didn't seem fazed by the fact that I came with considerable baggage. We went to dinner at the Olive Garden in Cedar Falls, and I spent half the night talking about my kids because they were my life. My whole world. "You're a good father," Patricia said over breadsticks and salad. "Those children are lucky to have you." I wanted to believe her, but the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like shame whispered that if I'd been a good husband, maybe their mother wouldn't have left. Patricia and I dated for about 6 months. She was wonderful with the kids, never trying to replace their mother but offering a gentle female presence in their lives. Emma particularly bonded with her, enjoying having someone to talk to about girl things that I couldn't quite navigate. But in the end, Patricia wanted children of her own, and I couldn't imagine starting over with a baby when I was still healing from the wounds Sarah had left. We parted as friends, and she sent Christmas cards for years afterward. I respected her honesty about what she needed, even as it reinforced my growing belief that our little broken family was meant to make it on our own. The middle school years brought new challenges. Emma started asking more pointed questions about her mother. "Why did she leave us, Dad? What did we do wrong?" These conversations usually happened late at night, often after she'd had a nightmare or seen a movie featuring a happy family. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," I'd tell her, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, even to them. Your mother was struggling with things that had nothing to do with you kids. "But didn't she love us?" Emma would ask, and I'd struggle to find an answer that was honest but not devastating. "I think she loved you the best way she knew how," I'd say. But love isn't always enough to make someone stay. Sometimes people are fighting battles inside themselves that are bigger than their love. Michael dealt with his abandonment issues differently. He became intensely competitive, driven to excel at everything he tried. I think he was trying to prove himself worthy of staying, as if his achievements could protect him from being left again. He made honor roll every semester, scored the winning goal in soccer championships, and pushed himself relentlessly in everything he did. "You don't have to be perfect, son," I told him one evening when I found him crying over a B+ on a math test. "I'm proud of you no matter what grades you bring home." "But what if I'm not good enough?" he asked, and I heard the deeper fear underneath his words. What if I'm not good enough to make people stay? Katie, now old enough to understand that she was missing something other kids had, started acting out at school. She got into fights with classmates who made comments about her missing mommy. She came home with a bloody nose one day after punching a boy who'd said her mother didn't love her. "He's wrong, isn't he, Daddy?" she asked that evening as I cleaned the scrape on her knuckles. "Mommy does love me, right? She just can't be here?" I looked into my baby girl's defiant, hopeful eyes and lied with conviction. "Of course she loves you, sweetheart. Sometimes people show love in ways that are hard to understand." High school brought different challenges and different victories. Emma blossomed into a confident young woman, though she remained fiercely independent. She worked part-time at the local bookstore and saved every penny for college, determined to never depend on anyone else for her security. She was accepted to the University of Iowa with a partial scholarship, and I cried at her graduation, proud and terrified in equal measure. Michael found his passion in engineering, spending hours building complex models and teaching himself programming on our increasingly outdated computer. He was quieter than his sisters, more introspective, but he had a dry sense of humor that could surprise you. He maintained his drive for perfection, but learned to balance it with genuine friendships and interests outside of achievement. Katie grew up to be our firecracker, fearless and outspoken, ready to take on the world. She played 3 sports, participated in drama club, and somehow managed to maintain a social life that kept our phone ringing constantly. She was the most openly affectionate of the 3, still giving me hugs and telling me she loved me even as a teenager, when such displays often embarrass kids. Throughout their teenage years, I waited for the explosion that never came. I kept expecting them to blame me for their mother's absence, to resent me for not being enough to make her stay, to act out in ways that would reflect their abandonment issues. Instead, they seemed to understand instinctively that we were a team, that what we had was precious and worth protecting. That's not to say we didn't have our struggles. Emma went through a phase where she wouldn't talk about college because she was afraid to leave Michael and Katie. Michael had a few friendships that ended badly because he expected too much loyalty from people who couldn't understand the depth of his need for security. Katie got her heart broken by her first boyfriend when she was 16, and the betrayal sent her into a depression that lasted months. But we weathered each storm together. We had family meetings to discuss major decisions. We maintained traditions that became sacred to us. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday evening movie marathons, annual camping trips to Backbone State Park where we'd hike and fish and tell stories around the campfire. I never stopped hoping that Sarah would come back into their lives, if only to give them closure. I saved every school photo, every report card, every award certificate, thinking that someday she might want to see proof of the amazing humans she'd helped create. But years passed without word, and eventually I stopped expecting anything different. When Emma was preparing to leave for college, she sat me down for a conversation I'll never forget. She was 18, beautiful and determined, with Sarah's eyes but a strength that was entirely her own. "Dad," she said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, "I need you to know something. You gave us the best childhood you could. You were our mother and our father, and you never made us feel like we were missing anything important." I started to protest, to list all the ways I'd fallen short, but she held up her hand. "I'm not finished. I know you think you failed somehow because Mom left. I know you blame yourself, but I want you to understand something. She didn't leave because of you. She left because she was selfish and immature, and she chose her own wants over her children's needs. That's on her, not on you." I sat there looking at my eldest daughter, this remarkable young woman who was wiser at 18 than I'd been at 44, and felt something shift inside my chest. A weight I'd been carrying for 18 years began to lift, just slightly. "You saved us," Emma continued. "You could have fallen apart, could have given up, could have made us feel like burdens. Instead, you made us feel loved and wanted and secure. You gave us everything that mattered. Katie graduated high school 2 years later, having been accepted to Iowa State with plans to study veterinary medicine. Michael had already left for MIT, his brilliant mind finally finding the challenges it craved. I found myself, at 61, living alone for the first time since Sarah left. The empty nest was harder than I'd expected. After 27 years of constant motion, constant need, constant purpose, the quiet house felt cavernous. I'd succeeded in raising 3 incredible children, but what was my purpose now? Who was I, if not their primary caregiver? I started volunteering at the local Boys and Girls Club, working with kids from single-parent homes. It felt like a way to use everything I'd learned, to help other children navigate the challenges my own kids had faced. The work was rewarding, but it also forced me to confront some truths I'd been avoiding. I was 61 years old and hadn't had a serious relationship in over 2 decades. I'd convinced myself it was noble, sacrificing my romantic life for my children's well-being. But they were grown now, successful and happy, and I was alone. Not just physically alone, but emotionally isolated in ways I'd trained myself not to think about. One evening, while looking through old photo albums, I found our wedding pictures. Sarah looked so young, so hopeful, her hand in mine as we promised to love each other through everything life might bring. I tried to remember what I'd loved about her, beyond the obvious answer that she was the mother of my children. She'd been funny, quick with jokes and observations that made me laugh. She'd been affectionate, always touching my arm when she talked, curling up against me while we watched television. She'd been enthusiastic about small adventures, trying new restaurants, exploring antique shops, planning elaborate birthday parties for the kids. But looking back with decades of perspective, I could also see the signs I'd missed or dismissed. Her restlessness when the kids were napping and the house was quiet. Her comments about feeling trapped, which I'd attributed to normal parenting frustrations. Her increasing interest in music and fashion that seemed younger than her actual age. Her complaints about feeling invisible, which I'd tried to address with compliments that apparently weren't enough. I wasn't making excuses for her abandonment of our children. That remained unforgivable. But I was finally able to separate her failure as a mother from her unhappiness as a wife, and to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I bore some responsibility for the latter, even if none for the former. At 65, I retired from John Deere with a pension that would allow me to live modestly but comfortably. Emma was working as a social worker in Minneapolis, married to a good man named Tom, who treated her like the treasure she was. Michael was designing computer systems for a tech company in Boston, brilliant and successful and still calling home every Sunday. Katie had graduated from veterinary school and opened her own practice in Ames, specializing in large animals and making more money than I'd ever dreamed of. All 3 of my children had grown into adults I was enormously proud of. They were kind, hardworking, and resilient. They'd learned to love deeply without fear, to trust carefully but completely, and to value family above all else. If their childhoods had scarred them, those scars had made them stronger rather than weaker. The years passed quietly. I read more books than I'd had time for when the kids were home. I learned to cook for one, mastering recipes I'd never had time to attempt when I was feeding a family. I maintained the house, kept a small garden, and stayed in touch with old friends. It was a peaceful life, if sometimes lonely. Then, 3 years ago, something happened that I never expected. I received a phone call from a woman named Margaret Chen, a social worker in Denver, Colorado. "Mr. Thompson," she said. "I'm calling about Sarah Thompson. I believe she was your wife?" Was. Past tense. My heart started beating faster. "She passed away 2 weeks ago," Margaret continued gently. "She'd been ill for some time. Liver failure. She didn't have any identification with her when she was admitted to the hospital, but she kept talking about her children, Emma, Michael, and Katie. It took us some time to track you down. Sarah was dead. The woman who'd walked out of our lives 32 years earlier was gone, and I felt empty. Not sad, exactly, but hollow, like something that had been part of me forever had simply evaporated. She wanted me to tell you something," Margaret continued. "She said to tell you she was sorry. She said you were a good man and a good father, and that she knew the children were better off with you. She said she never stopped thinking about them, but she was too ashamed to reach out." I thanked Margaret for calling and hung up the phone. Then I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I'd built without Sarah, and tried to process the information that she was gone. The woman who'd given birth to my children, who'd shared my bed and my dreams for 18 years, who'd broken all of our hearts with her selfishness and immaturity, was no longer part of this world. I called each of the kids to tell them. Their reactions were as different as they were. Emma was quiet for a long time, then said, "I'm sad for the woman she could have been if she'd made different choices. But I'm not sad for us. We had you, and that was enough." Michael was more analytical. "It's strange to grieve someone who was already gone to us," he said. "But I guess there's something final about it now. The door that was always slightly open in my mind just closed." Katie cried, which surprised me. She'd been so young when Sarah left that she had fewer memories to process. "I'm crying for the grandmother she'll never be to my future children," she explained, "and for the relationship we never got to have or heal. We decided not to attend her funeral. It felt hypocritical to mourn publicly for someone who'd chosen to be absent from our lives. Instead, we had our own memorial of sorts. Emma, Michael, and Katie all came home for a weekend, and we spent it looking through old photos, sharing memories, and talking about forgiveness. I don't forgive her for leaving us," Katie said firmly, "but I forgive her for being human and flawed and making terrible choices. Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense to me. We could acknowledge Sarah's humanity without excusing her actions. We could feel compassion for the lost, unhappy woman she'd apparently remained without absolving her of the damage she'd done. We could close this chapter of our story with grace, rather than bitterness. That weekend was healing in ways I hadn't expected. For the first time in 32 years, we talked openly about what Sarah's abandonment had meant to each of us, how it had shaped us, what we'd learned from it. Emma admitted she'd struggled with trusting romantic partners. Michael confessed he'd been afraid to have children of his own because he was terrified of damaging them the way we'd been damaged. Katie revealed that she'd chosen to work with animals, partly because their love felt safer and more predictable than human love. But we also talked about the gifts that had come from our unusual family structure. We were incredibly close, bonded by shared adversity and mutual dependence. We'd learned to communicate openly, to support each other unconditionally, and to value what we had rather than mourning what we'd lost. We'd discovered reserves of strength we might never have needed otherwise. Most importantly, we'd learned that families aren't just about blood or legal connections. They're about choice, commitment, and love in action. Sarah might have been their biological mother, but I'd been their parent in every way that mattered. Now, at 77, I can finally tell this story without the bitter taste of shame in my mouth. I can acknowledge that being abandoned by my wife was devastating without believing it was deserved. I can celebrate the family we became without mourning the family we'd planned to be. My children are all married now, to partners who love and value them. Emma and Tom have 2 daughters who call me Grandpa Dave and think I make the best pancakes in the world. Michael and his husband James adopted a little boy from foster care, giving him the stability and love they both understood the value of. Katie married her veterinary school classmate, and they're expecting their first child this fall. I look at these beautiful families my children have created, and I see the cycle of love continuing. They learned from our experience, both the good and the bad, and they're building something even stronger. They're not afraid to love deeply, because they learned that even when love fails, life goes on. They're not afraid to commit, because they understand the difference between choosing someone and being chosen. As for me, I'm content. I never did remarry, though I had a few meaningful relationships over the years. I realized that I was complete on my own, that I didn't need romantic love to validate my worth or heal my wounds. My children were my great love story, my magnum opus, my contribution to the world. The house in Cedar Rapids is too big for me now, but I can't bring myself to sell it. This is where we became a family, where we learned to heal, where we built something beautiful from the wreckage of abandonment. These walls hold too many memories, too much love, too much life. I still sleep on the same side of the bed I always did, even though there's no one to share it with. I still make coffee for 2 sometimes, forgetting for a moment that I'm the only one who'll drink it. I still listen for the sound of children's voices in the hallway, though the only visitors now are grandchildren who fill the house with laughter during holidays and summer visits. But these aren't sad habits anymore. They're the comfortable routines of a life well lived, a battle well fought, a story with an ending I can be proud of. If I could speak to my 44-year-old self, the man who stood in this kitchen 33 years ago reading a note that changed everything, I'd tell him that he was stronger than he knew. I'd tell him that the children were going to be okay. Better than okay. I'd tell him that being abandoned wasn't a reflection of his worth, and that the love he gave freely and completely would come back to him multiplied beyond his wildest dreams. I'd tell him that the story he thought was ending was actually just beginning, and it would be more beautiful than anything he could have planned. This morning, as I finish writing this story, my phone rings. It's Katie, calling to tell me she felt the baby kick for the first time. "I can't wait for you to meet your newest grandchild, Dad," she says, and I can hear the joy and love in her voice. I think about the baby who'll be born this fall, about the love that's waiting for him or her, about the family story that continues to unfold. I think about how Sarah's abandonment, which felt like the end of everything, was actually the beginning of something deeper and more meaningful than I ever could have imagined. Love isn't always about staying. Sometimes it's about having the courage to rebuild when someone leaves. Sometimes it's about showing up every day, even when everything feels impossible. Sometimes it's about learning that you're enough, all by yourself, to create something beautiful and lasting. I was 44 when she walked out that door with a suitcase in one hand and our vows crushed in the other. But I was also 44 when I discovered that I had everything I needed to give my children the love and security they deserved. I was 44 when I learned that being abandoned doesn't diminish your worth. It reveals your strength. The shame I carried for so many years has finally lifted, replaced by something I never expected: gratitude. Not gratitude for Sarah's leaving, but gratitude for what we became because of it. Gratitude for the depth of love between my children and me, forged in the fire of shared adversity. Gratitude for the resilience we discovered, the bonds we strengthened, the family we chose to be. This is my story of betrayal, yes, but it's also my story of redemption, of healing, of love that survives and thrives despite everything. It's the story of how I became a mother and a father overnight, and how that challenge became the greatest privilege of my life. To anyone who's facing their own moment of abandonment, their own shattered dreams, their own impossible situation, you are stronger than you know. You have more love to give than you realize. And sometimes, the family you build from the pieces is more beautiful than the one you planned. The sun is setting now in Cedar Rapids, painting the kitchen golden in the same light that has welcomed me home for 33 years. Tomorrow, Emma is bringing the grandkids for Sunday dinner. Michael and James are driving up from Chicago with little David, who wants to help me in the garden. Katie and Mark will call from Iowa City to share an ultrasound photo. This house will fill with laughter and chaos and love, the way it has every Sunday for years now. We'll eat too much, tell the same stories we always tell, and take pictures to add to the albums that chronicle our imperfect, beautiful, chosen family. And I'll go to bed tomorrow night grateful for the life I never planned but wouldn't trade for anything. The life that began the day I realized I was enough, all by myself, to be everything my children needed. That's the real story, the one worth telling. Not how we were broken, but how we became whole.